Sten, we're live.
And thank you, Larry, the Liberty Guy. Welcome to another edition, a Tuesday edition of In the Dugout. I am your host, Mike Stenhouse. We're in the dugout, and this is opening day of the Major League Baseball season week. Does anybody care anymore? The Red Sox open Thursday. I think we'll have coverage on that on our show Thursday. But is anybody paying attention to the Red Sox this year? Did anybody pay attention to the Celtics this year? I know a lot of people paid attention to Patriots, but you don't hear much buzz. I mean, the Celtics are having a disappointing season, and the Red Sox had a pretty good spring. I mean, although that doesn't mean much. As a team, they won a lot of games. Individually, I didn't see a lot of great performances in what I was able to monitor of the club. But it is opening day week, and that used to be a big time here in New England and in Rhode Island for Red Sox fans and Red Sox Nation. I mean, does that even matter anymore to anybody? Well, it kind of does to me, but I just don't hear as much talk about it. I mean, last year was a brutal year for Red Sox fans with the pandemic and with the terrible year the Red Sox had. Okay, so today, first half hour, I'm going to be your special guest again, just me. I've got a lot to say, a lot of comments. Second half of the hour, we're going to be joined, as we always are on Tuesday afternoons, by Justin Katz, editor of the Ocean State Current, our center's research director. And during the General Assembly session, which is now, we're just pretty much approaching the middle of that. Justin's feature is current legislation, the good, the bad, and the interesting. I'm sure there are some ugly bills out there too, but we're not including that in Justin's little segment. All right, what I'm going to talk about today. Well, first of all, tomorrow, second half of the show, we're going to have Representative Mike Chippendale on. And we have another invitation out, so we'll let you know that tomorrow. Mike Chippendale is going to talk about a bill. You know, they're trying to put, you know how they have speed cameras in school zones in recent years to catch speeders, ostensibly. And just like everything the General Assembly and the left does, they get their nose under the tent for one reason, and then they pull a bait and switch, and they expand that into something that totally wasn't intended. And so what they're now proposing to do is to have speed cameras pretty much on every state road across Rhode Island to harass you, to pilfer more money from you if you dare go a few miles over the speed limit. Of course, it's a big invasion of privacy as well. So we will talk about the speed camera, statewide speed camera bill tomorrow with Representative Mike Chippendale. Then, of course, on Thursday, Dr. Andrew Boston, all things COVID and whatever non-conventional wisdom approach Andy has taken that day. All right, today we've got a long round of batting practice, so I'll go to put my cap on. I'll go with the trusty crimson cap. By the way, can I see? I'm not doing it to brag, but can I inform you of something that was reminded of me last night regarded to my Harvard baseball career, which preceded my professional baseball career. I did an interview, long interview. There's a gentleman, a young guy, 37-year-old guy, former football coach in Massachusetts, who does a podcast. He's a friend of my stepson. And he said, you know, I do mostly Massachusetts content. Mike being a former Red Sox player, that's me. Would you agree to come on my show and talk baseball? So we did. And I went on his show, and I had forgotten about something that was discussed last night. Do you know that you're looking at right now? And again, I just say this as fact. I had 3 really, really good years at Harvard. In my freshman year, I was second in Division I in hitting. My freshman year at 475. A guy from Gonzaga hit 480. Gonzaga never made it in the big leagues or anything. But, and of course, Gonzaga in the Final Four in basketball. But over my 3 years, do you know that my all-time My career batting average is the all-time highest of any Ivy League player in Ivy League history. I mean, I don't know how long they've been playing baseball in the Ivy League. It's got to be over 100 years or more. I mean, Lou Gehrig went to Columbia. But my career batting average is the highest. I think it's 415 is the highest in the history of the Ivy League. So that's why I decided to wear my Harvard hat today, because we happened to talk about it. It came up last night. I had kind of forgotten about that fun fact. All right, what we're going to talk about today during batting practice before we get to our guest, Justin Katz. Is Superman dead? I'll explain. You've heard us talk about Rhode Island's Green New Deal, but did you know there's also Rhode Island's New Deal? So we got the Green New Deal and we got the New Deal. They're both bad for Rhode Island. I've invented the term New Deal today. I'll explain that. Vaccine passports are the talk now of the totalitarian left, limiting where you can go, what events you can attend, maybe where you can travel, which states. Vaccine passport. Is it just about COVID vaccines, or is it about something larger? We'll talk about that. We have an update, not a Rhode Island update, but we have a national update on this issue of transgender athletics. Should biological boys be able to play in girls' sports? A couple of states, well, one is regard to sports, one is regard to the larger transgender issue. So a couple of updates from states from South Dakota and Arkansas. And then, of course, like I said, we'll have Justin Katz in a few minutes. All right. So Rhode Island's Green New Deal. This is the Act on Climate bill that has versions of passed, each the House and the Senate. It appears destined, after a few more committee votes and floor votes, when they each have to validate each other's bills. Again, the process even to me is confusing, but one or both of those have to happen. So it's got to be another week or so before 10 days before it gets on Governor McKee's desk. And of course, Governor McKee has not given any indication where he stands on this radical left environment. You've heard us be critical of him for not providing any leadership on this issue by trying to read the political tea leaves and then deciding whether he'll risk a veto and then risk trying to switch votes to sustain that veto. That is not leadership. That is political cowardice. And, we want to be open-minded. We're hopeful that this governor won't fall prey to the same left-wing progressive media, academia influences the prior governor did, Raimondo, but my hopes are dwindling in this regard. But anyway, in recent days, I've talked to sources inside the House, inside the Senate, and they actually believe that this legislation can still be stopped. There's two theories on how they might stop it. The first would be a straight upward. If McKee does decide to veto it, then probably the more likely place where the veto could be sustained would be in the House, where 9 votes would need to be flipped. 9 people voted for the bill the first time, would have to vote, kind of reverse course and vote to sustain the governor's veto. But there are House members who believe that there may be up to 24 Democrats and 1 Republican who could change their mind, who weren't all that wild about this bill in the first place and just voted for it because of the pressure put on by Speaker Shekarchi. Similarly, in the Senate, there's a similar sentiment. So one strategy is hope for a gubernatorial veto and then work hard to try to flip 9 votes. That's strategy 1 to defeat that bill. Strategy 2 to beat Rhode Island's Green New Deal, or what the left is calling the Act on Climate, would be I think it's going to start with the Senate, where the Senate would pass the bill, but with one important amendment that makes it substantially or materially different than the House version. And like we saw with the pay equity bill a few years ago, when they have substantially different versions of the same bill, they just throw up their hands and say, well, and they throw them up on purpose, pretending they were trying to work hard to reconcile those differences. But in the end, they're saying, we're probably better off if we don't pass this bill. So let's just pretend that we can't reconcile. And that way it'll never get to the governor to have to veto or not. Again, it would be very helpful if the governor said what he was going to do on this bill. But again, he hasn't demonstrated that leadership. So it's either the can't reconcile the two versions of the bill strategy or hope for a veto and a sustaining of that veto strategy. So that's what's going on. But again, you can have an influence in that. Remember, we have set up a website, rifreedom.org/energy choices, where you can complete a form that will send an email to the governor's office and to 9 or 10 other lawmakers among the group that many think could change their mind. So please do it. We've generated over 20,000 emails so far. So please visit there. Please promote it to your networks, promote it to your friends and family, send out repeated emails. Lawmakers do respond when you speak up. Call your lawmaker too. You heard Blake Filippi on the show say that as well. In addition to filling out the form at rifreedom.org/energy choices, call your lawmaker as well and tell them to either not vote for or sustain a veto on the Act on Climate bill. All right. The Transportation and Climate Initiative bill, which is sort of a subset of the Green New Deal. Still, that status is unknown. That would impose an immediate gas tax on people, starting somewhere in the 5 to 11 cent range, potentially going up to 28 to 40 cents per gallon over the next 5 years. And we've already seen gas prices dramatically rise since Joe Biden took office because of his anti-carbon policy, shutting down the pipeline, shutting down a lot of other energy production on federal fracking on federal lands. So gas prices, you've noticed it at the pump, gas prices are already up dramatically. How'd you like them to go up another 30, 40 cents? Well, that's what the TCI gas tax would be. But these gas taxes and these energy carbon taxes and this Act on Climate, the Green New Deal, are just part of the taxes that the left wants to raise on you. They're also talking about trying to phase out the car tax, although I don't think Governor McKee's going to go for that. And they're also talking about a substantial increase to the income tax in a classic class warfare scenario. Again, this is the favorite tactic of the left. Now, the income tax hike, I'm not going to read these, but here's one. Here's two. These are just flyers that I have received in the mail, and you may have received them too, backed by union and progressive left groups looking to raise taxes, advocating for income tax hikes in this state. Again, only taxing the very rich, the very top 1 or 2%, only the wealthiest. Won't impact you. Yes, it will impact you. When there are fewer wealthy people in this state, when there are fewer job producing investors in this state, our state, we will lose our tax base, which means they're going to have to raise taxes on you to make up for those lost revenues that we're going to drive people out of state. Of course, it has an impact on you. We had Steve Moore on this show, one of the nation's great free market economists, and he said the same thing. Look up that video. In fact, you can look up that video. We have a website that I'd like to let me type it up here and bring it up. You call Raise Sales Not Taxes.com. Now, it's a little bit controversial, but let me ask you this. Would you rather be dependent on government handouts and services to live at some measly government-defined level of subsistence? Or would you like to be wealthy enough to be in a position to buy a boat and raise your own sail? Doesn't mean you have to buy a boat, but wouldn't you like to be in a position to be able to be prosperous enough to be able to buy a boat? So we can either raise taxes and create, a dependency society, or we can keep taxes where they are, if not cut taxes, and create a more prosperous society where you can have more options, work options to earn more money. There's a way to click here to say, if you go to raisesalesnottaxes.com, it's a one-page microsite. You can click to say no to the higher gas taxes. We have some information on the TCI gas tax. Did you know even the Sierra Club, one of the big, has withdrawn its support of TCI because of the non-existent environmental benefits that will result? It's just going to impose higher energy costs on us with no environmental return. And even the Sierra Club has recognized that now. We talk a little bit more about TCI. We talk about why it's also a bad time to raise income taxes. Here's the interview you can click on with Steve Moore. And here's an article by Mike DeBiase. Mike DeBiase was the former director of administration for Gina Raimondo. And here's that opinion piece that appeared, I think, over the weekend in the Providence Journal. And just like we've been saying, for disclosure, Mike DeBiase is a high school classmate of mine. Used to be a pretty active Republican. For some reason, he left a high-paying job at Fidelity and went to become the director of administration for Gina Raimondo, and started all of a sudden adopting all kinds of, or at least backing. I'm sure it was because of his boss, Gina Raimondo, but all of a sudden he's backing pretty far left liberal policies. But anyway, he's now out of the administration. He's a little freer now again to probably speak his true mind. And his true mind from this former high-ranking official is that hiking personal income taxes, as the unions and as the socialist left is proposing, will indeed hurt our state economy. So there's a link on Raise Sales Not Taxes to that page. To that article as well. And of course, as we know, higher taxes are going to drive more people out of state. And there's more information on that page. So it's just a very simple website, but I'd like you to stop promoting it and visiting it. RaiseSalesNotTaxes.com. Okay, now, altogether, all those taxes, the gas taxes, the climate bill, the Green New Deal, the income tax, I'm going to start dubbing those Rhode Island's New Deal. Now, you know what the original New Deal was, right? That was Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal, following the Depression, which he didn't cause, but which the leftist policies of Herbert Hoover caused. And what most people don't understand is that Roosevelt's New Deal did not save the economy. Here's a graph to look at. This is, and as it says here, the greatest historical lie in American history is the myth for over 80 years now that Roosevelt's, FDR's New Deal worked. It did not. Here's unemployment rate in America. Here's where the Depression hits in 1929. And here's in this pinkish area is where the New Deal comes in. For the next 9 years, the unemployment rate stayed pretty much above 15%. It wasn't until World War II, around here, and the threat of war, as we are even ramping up. We were ramping up for World War II before we committed to fighting it. We were arming arming ourselves. We were arming, maybe even covertly, some of our allies. But it was that really, it was World War II and all the production that went into that that really caused the unemployment rate to drop in our economy. But you can see this is the Green New Deal, right in this area here, right in this area, this pink area. It did not work. And now Rhode Island is basically trying to do the same thing. Rhode Island is trying to tax more and spend more. Federal government on top of that. It's never worked historically. It didn't work for FDR. It was World War II that worked for FDR. And it's not going to work in Rhode Island. So whether it's the Green New Deal in Rhode Island or the New Deal in Rhode Island, it's destined for failure. That's why I want you to visit raysalesnottaxes.com. All right, here's an interesting story about Superman, the Superman building. I think, a lot of people felt like the building had no chance to recover, that it was too much work, too expensive, even though there were many that were trying to find the taxpayer subsidies. But the COVID shutdowns, the government shutdowns because of the pandemic have made a lot of companies realize, well, first of all, forced a lot of companies to close permanently. Second of all, means a lot of companies can't afford the overhead of office space anymore and may be going virtually. And even those that could afford it may be saying, we don't even need that overhead, even if we can afford. So there are vacancies everywhere in downtown Providence, and that's not even counting the Superman building. So, you can't even consider putting any money into that structure, and no public money should go into that. But I can't see now any private investor donating in the Superman building with so many vacancies in downtown Providence. You can see the pictures here. The article just goes on and captures how new construction is down. And so any major edits or renovation to that Superman building are dead. So I think it's safe to say in Rhode Island that the Superman building is dead. Could it be resurrected from the dead? In politics, almost anything could happen. All right, let's a few more topics before we bring on our guests. Let's discuss COVID a little bit. Now, we save our heavy duty talks for Dr. Boston on Thursday afternoons. So I try to get into things a little more political in nature and a little less medical in nature, if you would. So there's been much ado about the fact that Texas and Florida and Mississippi are states that have pretty much said no more mandatory mask mandates. You can wear them if you want, but no more mandates and social distancing. And we're going to open up facilities and they can impose their own distancing or whatever mandates they want. But again, we're going to let the free market and businesses and people choose. And that's the way pretty much should have been after the first 2 weeks in this country. So a lot of talk about those states. Well, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times. Let's just look at this. As it says here, guess which of these 4 states the New York Times wrote negatively about rising cases. Now, remember cases. We'll get back to that in a second. So here you see Florida. Florida, I don't know when they ended their mandatory mandates, somewhere in here, but you can see it's continued to go down and maybe a slight uptick in recent weeks towards the end of March. But look at these massive upticks in Michigan, in New Jersey, in New York. These are where heavy lockdowns, heavy mask mandates still exist. I can't explain why that's happening. We'll ask Dr. Boston about this on Thursday. But this is the fact. This is the trend. This is what is happening. But yet the New York Times chose to criticize Florida's much lower and significant, much lower in terms of total and much taller in terms of rate of increase. They decide to criticize the red state of Florida. I mean, isn't it just sickening how they do it? And then the hysteria. That's what attracted us to Dr. Boston in the first place. There's an article he titled "An Unhysterical Response to the COVID Crisis." And again, here's media. I mean, I don't know what's happened to Go Local Prov. They are just now, occasionally they'll do a good story, an investigative story, but now they are totally on board to spreading the fear about this virus. Every major story we've seen, this Dr. Fine is a socialist, communist, single payer, universal healthcare guy. Dr. Nicole Alexander Scott, our state director of health, same thing. And all they do is want to raise the fear. Raise the fear. Instead of flattening the fear, allowing us to go back, they want to raise the fear. And for some reason, Go Local Prov promotes this bogus stuff. I mean, look at these rates in Rhode Island. You saw that headline right there. You saw the headline, a third coronavirus wave, maybe coming, right? That's what they're saying. Well, hold on. What happened to my screen share here? But here's the truth. Just take a look at these charts as soon as they load. So here are the number of cases. Slight uptick, although you can see it's going down the last few days. But does that look like a wave, a new wave like this or like that? But again, cases are not what matters. This is our point we've been making from day one. Cases among healthy younger populations is actually a good thing because it gets us closer to herd immunity. And it's not going to bother these people, these younger people, healthier people. Cases are not the things to talk about, which Dr. Boston, we talk about every week. Look at the rate of deaths in Rhode Island, just dramatically going down in recent months. Same with hospitalization. That's what really matters. Counting cases is like counting molecules in the air. I mean, the more you test, the more you'll find. It's how if people are really seriously and adversely affected by those cases that matters. And right now, there is no increased wave of severe cases in America. Now, in some of those states, believe it or not, especially the masked states, some of those hospitalizations are going up, and I don't know how to explain that. But in the open states, the states that have freed themselves from many of the well, how about the Neanderthal states? And maybe that's what we should call them, because remember how Joe Biden said Texas and Florida, Mississippi, Neanderthals for removing those mask mandates? Well, here's a chart that shows, you just saw how Florida was doing so much better compared to Michigan, New York, and New Jersey. Well, here's how Mississippi and Texas, since they became Neanderthals right here, right at this time point, their cases, even though cases I don't think are the ultimate measure, but still, their cases are going down, while Michigan, New York, and New Jersey cases are going up. I mean, I can't explain it, but it's true. And we've known for 6 months, 7 months, 8 months that masks and all these quote mitigation things that we were told don't work. It's really amazing. I don't know how to explain that, but clearly the question here is, who's the Neanderthal? Who's really the Neanderthal? We know who the totalitarians are, but really, who's the Neanderthal? All right. Last item before we bring on Justin Katz. And I might even get Justin's view on this, even though there's no relative bill in Rhode Island. Vaccine passports. Are we going to need vaccine passports in order to travel, attend events, patronize a business? I guess private businesses can do what they want. but they shouldn't. I don't know. I'll have to think about that. I don't know if they can. I know. I mean, we've always said it's okay if a private business wants to mandate masks and you don't like it, then you go to some other business. I don't know if we'd have the same attitude on vaccines or not. I don't know. But anyway, they're coming to some parts of this country. Whether they come to Rhode Island, now, Governor Ron DeSantis has already spoken out. Again, this guy impresses me more and more all the time. As soon as the issue comes up, there will not be any vaccine passports in Florida. Off the table, guaranteed. That's leadership, folks, and that's freedom. All right, we will deal with this just like we dealt with flus and other ailments and issues in the past. Now, Ron Paul, not Rand Paul, Ron Paul, the elder of the Pauls. I was made aware of this tweet, which really leads to something much bigger than just vaccine passports. So he says, obviously, that Soviet-style vaccine passports, and that's what they'd be, especially if the government mandated them in any way. And even if private industry did, it would still be in America, as he says here, we would no longer recognize. But here's the kicker. Here's the really interesting point to all this. Vaccine passports, the social credit score platform for America. Now, do you know what that means? This could be the first step, these vaccine passports, and I think the official term is something like social scoring or social ratings, where the government, based on things you do or don't do, basically gives you a score so they know who's the good guys and who are the bad guys. So we can discriminate against or persecute or punish the bad guys. Or make sure that only the good guys get certain benefits or jobs or whatever the case may be. And social scoring could include any number of items. I don't know. I mean, I can't even. I mean, it's such an idea foreign to me. I can't even think what other kind of things. Did you vote? Did you attend? Joe Biden's rallies? Do you watch? Do you watch liberal YouTube? Anything like this could go to your social score that the government would track and monitor. I mean, how scary is that? And that's what vaccine passports would be, in my view, and I think what Ron Paul was saying here, would be a form of social scoring, rating you, pitting you against your neighbors to see who gets the goodies, who gets the handouts from government. I mean, it's really disturbing stuff. So right before I bring in tomorrow, we're going to talk a little bit more. I meant to get it today, but we don't have time. So I'll save it for tomorrow, an update on the other states with the transgender issue. There are some updates from Arkansas and South Dakota. Governor Kristi Noem has been in the news, even criticized for conservatives on the bill that's out there. We'll look a little more deeply into that tomorrow. So I'll save that for tomorrow, along with the topic of how I think conservatives are completely mismanaging the public relations on this awful border crisis that Joe Biden's administration has created. They've got a point, but I think they're dangerously mismanaging it. And I'll tell you why I think that tomorrow. All right, let's bring on Justin Katz. And Justin, welcome back to In the Dugout.
Good to be back.
All right, let's see. All right, first of all, In the Dugout, you're a creative guy with the caps. Sometimes not, most of the time, yes. What do you got today?
Now, today I thought I'd go, it's not a baseball cap, but with the Providence Friars here. But mostly it's because it's got my Ren Collective Choose to Worship pin. It's the Irish Catholic rock band. So
They're called Choose to Worship?
No, they're not Catholic, they're Christian, but no, they're called Rend Collective. The album was called Choose to Worship.
Rend Collective. Okay.
Ren, yep.
And it's a Christian rock?
Yeah, Irish Christian rock.
Irish Christian rock. Again, what's the name of the group? My wife likes that kind of stuff. What's it called?
Rend Collective.
Rend.
Yeah.
Okay, like as in render or something. Okay.
Yep.
All right. Before we get into the bills, what's your just all right, so just Justin is the editor of the Ocean State Current, state's premier conservative blog and news site, and he is the research director for our center. What is your understanding of what this social scoring is? I think China does it right now to some regard, and whether you think vaccine passports are like one step in that direction.
Well, I think it's a step in that direction. I mean, everything the left is doing is moving toward that. You'll have this vaccine passport, and to keep in mind here, a passport for a vaccine is needed only because you can't tell if people have the virus and are supposed to be scared if they're symptomless. That's why it's supposed to be scary. It's more like a point of view than a virus or a disease at this point. So I could see that as a step. But it made me think of recent years we have seen passed in Rhode Island benefit corporations. I think it was passed. I'm not positive.
Yeah. Special benefit
right.
corporation.
If your corporation is organized for good reasons, a good cause, according to the left,
if you follow green protocols.
Right, exactly. And so everything is starting to judge by whether you're down with the woke, so to speak. So I could definitely see this expanding. If people, I mean, when you say it's a step, it's not just that, okay, here's the card and then we'll start adding to it. It's really more like a step of what people will tolerate. Okay, I will tolerate that I can't go to a business without this card. All right, well, we'll just make a new card where you can't go to the business unless you do X, Y, or Z. And on a point you were making about private businesses, I've got to say, this is really, on masks, I could see, all right, it's
outward, yeah,
and it's
like wearing sandals, right? You can't wear sandals.
You can't come in without a shirt on.
Yeah,
that I could take. But once you start getting into having to take a medicine and have a card that says,
and it's also a violation of your private medical data, isn't it?
Right, it is. Too? But you start to get to where you bump into the laws that were anti-segregation, right? You're starting to get where a class of people could be excluded from going to concerts, or, I mean, it's not as if all these businesses start doing it, restaurants, if every business starts saying, no, you can't come in without this passport, then if you're the kind of person who's not going to get the vaccine for whatever reason, you can't go out to eat. And that starts to become a discriminatory practice. But that's precisely and directly where China is. If it's everything, if whatever they can put in their little score for you. Did you vote? Did you do this? As you say, did you like this post? Have you said anything against the government? That'll negatively affect you, and you won't be able to get credit. You won't be able to buy a house. You won't be able to go to school, etc.
So let's stay on this topic of a couple more minutes here, because you and I know this, because we have been propositioned and have actually tested out some products by big companies, database companies that compile information. Voter information is public information. All our names, addresses, how we're registered to vote, which elections we voted in or didn't vote in. I mean, we don't know how we voted, of course, but I mean, for whom we voted, but all that's public data. So a lot of companies, as you and I know, on the left and the right, have taken that data and then they buy consumer data, give me a list of everybody who buys this magazine, or give me a list to everybody who owns that kind of car, or everybody who does this or that, who is donated to this political campaign or there are companies and groups, private groups out there who are doing this audience data mining and then selling that information to groups involved in public policy or politics like us. And we've looked and even tried some of those products. But the scary thing there, Justin, is some of those groups actually try to give you a rating based on your habits. If you drive a Prius and subscribe to New Yorker magazine, you're probably pretty different from the guy who bought a rifle and drives a Ford F-150, right? Politically, you're probably pretty different people, so you get a rating. But but those ratings aren't always accurate. So to think that government would try to do the same thing and then base its government services or even its corrupt persecution on those ratings, what do you say about that?
Well, I'm not even so concerned that it'd be inaccurate. I'm concerned that it would be accurate. I mean, looking at this last election we had in Rhode Island, I mean, as a data crunching, politically involved kind of guy, I love it because you've got basically down to the precinct level 3 different types of voting. You've got the in-person, early, and mail, and you can see how each candidate did or issue did in each precinct by each method of voting. And that starts to get pretty terrifying because you can get very close to understanding how likely somebody was to actually have voted for or against your candidate or for your ballot issue or whatever. And that starts to get to where the government could say, this is how this person most likely voted to 95% accuracy. Therefore, they get marked on their little card. And at the very least, anybody who ever has to deal with them in government will know that you got that bad score.
You know, let's keep that in. Well, let's keep that in mind. Is it all right if we go to your bad bill first?
Sure.
I mean, did you have a particular order?
No, that's fine.
So let's keep that in mind as a segue, because I didn't think about it to what you just said. So let me share. First of all, I want to remind you that you can do exactly what we're going to do here. You go to this great website we've created for you, rifreedom.org/bills, where we've identified 132 bills that we think are worthy of tracking. And this is not a comprehensive list. It's just bills that have made aware of us. We don't have Justin read every piece of legislation submitted anymore. But when bills were made aware of and we think they're worth tracking, we add it to the list. So what bill number do we want to look at first here?
All right, so it's a pair of bills, 5981 and 0064. They're companion bills, but one's House, one's Senate.
All right, so these bills would basically set up speed cameras on every state road, right? Pretty much, or most.
Well, it creates the
roads,
allowance. Right? I mean, it's almost more insidious than that. What they've done, we already have allowance in the law for automatic ticketing in school zones.
Right.
You want people to go slowly. You put these things there mainly as a disincentive to speed. They're only operable during school hours. So that's the program they're taking, and they're changing it to allow any state or local road to have automatic speed.
All state cameras. And local roads within the state. Wow. Right. How many cameras is that?
Well, it doesn't mandate that they be there, but it does create.
Allows them to be there.
It creates the allowance for them.
So before we get into some of the more obvious issues, now this bill this is the House bill. So it's going to be heard in House Judiciary. What's the date today? Tomorrow?
29th today, isn't it?
Today's the 29th? Well, it's going to be heard. No, today's the 30th. Oh. So it's going to be heard tomorrow in House Judiciary. God, I'm terrible with dates. Wow. Is it? Wait a minute. House Judiciary hearing. Oh, first it was postponed. Interesting. It was scheduled to be heard last week. Then it's postponed, and then it got rescheduled again to be heard tomorrow. Interesting. All right. So we're going to have Mike Chippendale on to talk further, Representative Chippendale. But let's think about this bill with regard to scoring. If they can take pictures of your license plate and they can associate that with you as a voter, it wouldn't be hard to conceivably you get a +1 or a -1 depending on where you went, right? I mean,
yeah. I think in China, actually, things like traffic tickets do count towards your social score. So that's just accumulating tickets would be one bad demerit.
Yeah, but this would take pictures of your license plate, whether you got a ticket or not, right? Wouldn't it? Or is it only? How do these work? Do they only snap a photo if somebody goes over the speed limit?
Yeah, I think I don't think they photograph every
it's not
car.
Photographing all the time.
The data. I mean, data.
I don't know if I believe that either. If they told me.
Yeah, but and also it's only temporary based on the cost of storing the data. Once every year, it's so much easier to get a terabyte drive, a 10 terabyte drive, and they keep getting bigger. Same thing with these. Once it's easy enough, they'll just stream it, and the camera will be able to grab every license plate that drives by.
All right. So apart from the social scoring potential aspect of this, what are your concerns with this bill?
Well, on the surface level, I think it's objectionable because it's very, very easy to imagine a state or municipalities implement these and then ratcheting down the speed limit or increasing the cost a little bit for it. So as a money grab, and to that end, I don't know what the motive here. It's clear to see. School zone is a limit area. You want people to go fast, go slowly. You put a camera there. This, what are we assuming? Everybody throughout the state is speeding all over the place. I mean, that's the surface issue of it, and it doesn't take into account discretion and incentives. I mean, you could see it's easy to set up a system where roads of this sort can only go 25, but in some areas on a road, somewhere is curving, some places is straightaway. You have discretion where the police officer, you don't have to change the sign every time the road changes. The police officer says, I'm not going to bust somebody for 5 miles an hour there. Or if they do, they make sure you're
Right,
okay.
right.
But this takes that away. And that's what really profoundly bothers me about this.
All right. So what is the ostensible reason for this? Is it just, hey, we need to collect more money? Or is there some ostensible safety issue they're falsely promoting here?
Well, I will say they didn't put anything in the bill. Sometimes they'll put rationale and findings because we want to accomplish X, Y, and Z, and those can be useful if you're facing these things in court, because the judge will say, well, you're on the line here and you didn't violate their findings, but there is no finding here. It's got to be just a money grab in my view. And just an assumption of if you're breaking the law, we ought to catch you and get some money out of it, basically.
Who's the lead sponsor? Do we know on this? Which one of these five?
The
You know which
lead
one's
sponsor is Court. I don't know how to say the name. Court Friend.
Court Friend. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Bob Craven. That's disappointing that he'd be on there too. So there's a Senate. You said there's a Senate version of this too.
And that starts with 70.
Let's go back and look at that and click on that again. You can do this at rifreedom.org/bills. So the Senate version, let's see, that is sponsored by, again, disappointing, Lou DePalma. Actions.
Seems to be
Senate
popular on Aquidneck
Judiciary.
Island.
What's that?
It seems to be coming mainly from Aquidneck Island, which is that might be if you want to put a good spin on the motivation, that might be why, because they've got a lot of, two main roads go across the entire island. It can be some tricky roadways, but to put this broad sweeping thing where it's allowed everywhere in the state in order to address maybe a localized problem, that's what really, really deeply bothers me. I mean, the idea of this ultimately is that a central planner can say that all roads of this category have to be this speed. There's no discretion allowed. And so when you take out discretion, it's really the central planner who passes the regulation right to you who has to pay the fine. There's no in between there. And that's what really bothers me.
Yeah, me too. Now, does it say who gets the funds? The state, the locality? Who's funding the cameras?
I don't think
the
it
state or the
specifies
locality. So do we know how this is supposed to work?
I don't think this legislation specifies who
Wouldn't
gets the
that be
money.
important? I mean, they would have to do. I mean, is this a state program, a local program? I would have to. I'll ask Mike Chippendale tomorrow. Tune in tomorrow, and I know he's read up on the bill. All right. Let's go back. Let's clear. Let me share our screen and let's clear our filter. And what do you want to go with next?
So we'll go with the good, and that's 5443.
What happened? Oh, I got the wrong one here. Gonna reset over here. I gotta click on the right column. So we want to go 5443.
Yep.
And this is a good bill.
Yep, this is a good bill. I mean, not earth-shakingly good, but it's hard to find good bills in our General Assembly as it is. So what this does, it expands the exception that allows children and their parents to decline required school immunizations. It expands the exemption. Right now, you just can be exempt for religious beliefs. It adds personal and philosophical beliefs to that as well, which
could be almost anything.
Right. I mean, as a practical matter, it doesn't make a big difference if you've got a problem with a particular vaccine. I know a lot of people, it's been HPV. Then you can say you have a religious opposition to it. Religion isn't really defined. There's no test to make sure you really believe it. They don't go to your pastor and say, "Is this really against the your religion?" But on principle, it's not really that small of a change, because you can say, you can be honest about it. I have a moral problem with saying this is a religious difference. I actually have a practical difference with it, or a political difference with it, or some other difference. It's not just that you're religiously opposed.
This bill was heard 2 weeks ago, like all bills held for study. You don't know if it's going to come back or not. I am curious that the only sponsors are Democrats, and it's an interesting, I guess except for Anastasia, I guess you would say most of those are relatively moderate Democrats.
Yeah.
But still surprising there's no Republican on there. I don't know if they tried to get one or not.
Or they might have been off the top 5.
Now we've got friends in, now I think this is clear. This is not necessarily, a blanket anti-vax movement kind of bill, right?
Right. It's just an expansion of an exemption.
Common sense. It's common sense, right?
Yeah.
That you can't force, just like we're talking about with vaccine passports. You can't force people, if it goes against some core belief of theirs, to have their kids vaccinated if for some reason.
Right. Well, and you can see the importance of this, talking about social scoring or vaccination passport.
Right.
I mean, suppose you have the COVID vaccination passport and they implement a religious exemption, which in the Biden administration is doubtful, but if they were to do that, then you start to get to where maybe the law will start enforcing it, and say the government will start enforcing it and saying, well, you can only use that exemption if we can bona fide prove that your religion opposes this. This sort of exemption is important, where you can say, I have a political problem with this vaccine, I have a personal problem with this vaccine, and still not have to go and get it anywhere.
Brings up an interesting question. I mean, if you can opt out of vaccines for these reasons, shouldn't people be able to opt out of the COVID vaccine for the same reasons?
Exactly. And so that's another reason a bill like this might act as a pushback on that attitude, get people to start thinking about whether you ought to be exempt from these things. And hopefully Americans would still conclude yes.
Interesting times we live in. I mean, these are just, areas the government should not insert itself. I don't know what kind of laws there are now are there such laws now that would require a bill like this? I mean, is there some kind of mandate or consequence if you don't take vaccines, or a law like this is necessary? I mean, don't people just have the right to refuse a vaccine now for any reason? Or does the Department of Education have certain rules and regulations that you have to follow? And
no, that you do. Children are required to be immunized on certain illnesses.
Or they can't go to school.
Right. So the big difference with HPV was you're not going to. Well, they shouldn't be sharing venereal diseases in elementary and secondary school. That shouldn't be happening. So you can kind of see it with deadly diseases that kill a lot of people that are communicable, especially among children all over each other in a school setting, that you could start to see. But I think it's a reminder with HPV and now COVID. I mean, we're dealing still with emergency regulations essentially for management of a mild disease. That's why any strengthening of these kind of laws is a good thing.
Okay, let's close that one down. And where do you want to go next? Let me go back, share our screen. Let me clear our filter.
So for the interesting, I actually have 2 sets of bills, one that's good, one that's bad. So I'll give you one of the good and one of the bad to put in there. So one of the good is 5568. And as a warning, I'm going deep down into local government wonkiness here.
All right.
I think it's worthwhile. And then the bad bill that I'm contrasting with is 5392.
All right. So we're starting with which one?
So the good one, 5568, and in the Senate, it's 0307. This mild change, but it's in the right direction. It eases the quorum and voting requirements for local planning boards and zoning boards of review. Basically, it reduces the requirements by one. If you're involved in local government in some towns, you know this can be an issue where somebody needs some kind of variance or they need a hearing with the zoning board or the planning board, and it can take forever because if one person's sick, they don't have a quorum, two people have a conflict because you're talking about local zoning and they own property next door, that can become a real problem. And so this is just, as a practical matter, adjusting to make it a little bit easier for these boards to meet. And I think one of the things that's more deeper.
How many members are typically on a planning board? You're much more involved in local politics. I'm not involved at all in local town.
Well, I know zoning boards typically have 5 and then 2 alternates who can vote if somebody's absent or too many people conflict out. I think planning boards are about the same, 5 members or so. And sometimes that can be difficult to find. And I think that's the practical reality with our kind of government we're really not grappling with anymore. And gone are the days when going to town hall for an evening was a source of entertainment. People have other things they want to do, and it's getting very hard to find volunteers for these things. And so to try to lighten that up, if we're going to have planning and zoning performed by volunteers, which is probably a good thing, voices from the community with different perspectives, then we need to take into account the fact that these you're going to have a hard time finding. There are people lining up.
We're going to trust you on that. I mean, I don't know that I like that. I mean, these planning boards tend to get out of control, and to think that two people could determine the fate of a whole town kind of worries me a little bit. But I'll trust you on that. But looking at the trajectory of this bill, first it was held for study, and now there's a proposed substitute, and now the House Judiciary hearing is going to vote on this bill tomorrow. And what that means is when there's the leadership only allows a substitute bill if they're planning to move the bill. So it looks like this bill is headed for passage. Possibly.
But we'll have to see what the substitute is. It might be, if it's the bad one, which is backed by Shikarchi in the House, then that's although I don't know why they would substitute.
Well, whether we like it or not, this is headed for passage. They know what the substitute is. Leadership does, and they've agreed to move it. So so we'll have to wait and see whether we like it or not. But this bill is going to pass by my erudite view of things here. Okay,
but to your point, if I completely agree that major zoning and planning issues shouldn't be decided by these little boards for a whole town forever.
Yeah.
Unelected boards and all. But that's one of the things we ought to be. This bill helps us get into the direction of thinking that direction. If we can't get the people to volunteer, then maybe we shouldn't be having them with all these powers. Maybe we need to rethink that whole.
Yeah, I don't like ceding the powers. I think any of those other ones, even including school committees, should be advisory only. And the town council or city council should be the final word on those things. All right, let's go to 5392.
So now this one goes in kind of the other direction from a philosophical point of view. It creates a new requirement for, quote, continuing education for zoning board members who don't currently have that requirement, and increases the requirement for planning board members. I mean, it's not a huge imposition. It's 3 hours the first year and then 1 hour of continuing education every additional year. But again, these are boards where you already struggle for volunteers. They already have too much power. And what you're going to end up with, if you keep increasing the requirements, are basically people who are either motivated by some corrupt reason, they want to be on the board because they can get some money out of it somehow, or zealots. You're not going to get those people who say, you know what, I've got a spare night every month. I'll go sit on my zoning board and allow my neighbor to go over the line by a foot in order to build their garage. This kind of bill really starts to, again, put the hands in central planners. And I add as a note to this that these boards already have by requirements for legal help, administrative help. So making sure they're up on the latest theory of progressive zoning is not necessarily necessary.
All right, so this bill was heard earlier this month and is sitting in limbo. My question here then is continuing education by who? You know, if you look at continuing education in land use law, and you put a sustainable 21 person who doesn't believe in private property, and believes in the full power of eminent domain by the government in almost any circumstance, or you put somebody who respects private property and historical American land use values. I mean, you'd get two very different views. So does it say who's going to provide the education?
I believe it's DEM, so it's a state level will set the regulations. I think it's probably going to be up to the locality to figure out how they're going to.
That's the former group.
Yeah, definitely. But and I think one of the, to expand on what you're saying, part of the issue is that what you'll get, or sometimes you do get. I have a friend who's on an alternate on our local board here in Tiverton, and he's very much, you know what, go for it. It's your property. But this kind of thing, if you have this continuing education, what they'll do is they'll construct it. I forget, you'll know the term when they try to, you go to a meeting and they try to lead you in a particular direction, even though it's supposedly open for discussion. But that's what they'll do is they'll make people feel like you must, by law, you can't be the friendly guy who lets people violate these rules. It's just another way to squeeze that sense of local and actual reasonable control, which maybe that's the theme of all these bills today.
Yeah, and you know, you can see the sponsors are the Speaker of the House and a high, and Lauren Carson, a known environmentalist lefty. So, yeah, I mean, this is basically, to me, would you agree? This is education about Roadmap Rhode Island.
Basically, I mean,
Roadmap Rhode Island was all about private property and land use.
Right. Well, it's a way to push. Not only creates a bar to people who aren't going to join because they're not going to take the time to do continuing education every year, and beyond that, if you do get in there, it's their opportunity to try to tell you how you have to rule. Basically, when it's up to you, so your local control starts to evaporate.
A Roadmap Rhode Island education bill. I mean, they've already got Roadmap Rhode Island in pretty much every city's and town's comprehensive plan, and now they just want to solidify this these mandates and this dictatorial control of environmentalists by basically, it's not education, it's brainwashing, it's bribing, it's influencing.
Yeah, it's
bribing probably not,
yeah.
but no, I'll take that back. But it's certainly coercing, probably.
Yeah. Well, and that's, I mean, these planning boards and the zoning boards of the review, these are the boards, the entities that can say, yes, we realize this is in our comprehensive plan, but we're going to give you a variance from that. So they'll start to get the lawyers to come in and say, actually, you're not allowed to do that, or that's against principles of zoning or planning, or just another opportunity for them to squeeze those local free thinkers.
You know, the deviousness of the left, the nonstop, wherever I can find a crack, wherever I can create a wedge, wherever I can get their nonstop attention to detail. You really have to respect them in a bad way. They don't miss a gosh darn trick. They are everywhere trying to gain advantage for their agenda, and it is perpetual nonstop baloney.
In fairness to our side, though, they are funded with billions, maybe trillions in not only billionaire dollars, but government money. I mean, we saw after the Obama stimulus, we saw just waves and waves of these groups that were mandated to be used by state and local organizations. And I mean, that's where a lot of it's coming from. I suspect we'll see another wave now under the new stimulus from what folks are calling the Joe Obama administration.
Yeah, when I see a Speaker of the House sponsoring a bill like this, that now that we look at it, to me, has such obvious connections to Roadmap Rhode Island, it's very discouraging. All right, Justin Katz, great job again. Thanks for the good, the bad, and the interesting, and we will see you next week. Thanks, Justin.
Look forward to it. Thanks.
I'll tell you, they just don't stop. The left just keeps coming at you. The Green New Deal for Rhode Island's New Deal, our version of the FDR tax and spend policies that failed in the 1930s. Remember? The media criticizing states who are successfully dealing with COVID and leaving the states that are losing on both the economic and the medical front. I mean, the deck is so stacked. Deck is so stacked. Tomorrow, we may have a second guest. At bottom of the hour, we'll have Mike Chippendale represent. Talk a little bit more about that speed speed cameras on as many state and local roads as they can fund. We'll talk more about that tomorrow. I'm also going to cover the transgender updates in Arkansas and South Dakota. One dealing with sports, one not. And I'm also going to talk about how conservatives, I think, are really, really mismanaging the messaging on Joe Biden's border crisis. I'll talk about that tomorrow as well. So thank you for tuning in again in the Dugout. I'm Mike Stenhouse. We'll see you tomorrow. Next game, don't forget, this is opening day week for Major League Baseball and the Red Sox. Good day.